Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my voice to a very essential debate in this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, when I listened to the Prime Minister deliver his budget presentation on Monday evening, I could not help but recall the words of my predecessor, the Honorable Dr. Velon Leo John, who said, when he listened to a contribution by the late Sir John in this Honorable House as Prime Minister on the debate at the Appropriation Bill, he said, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, if during the course of the Prime Minister's address, a Martian, assuming that there are Martians, Mr. Speaker, a Martian had mysteriously entered this august assembly, he, the Martian, would have come to the seemingly ineluctable conclusion that this Prime Minister was indeed a new Prime Minister, entering his very first year in office, pregnant with the seeds of reorganization and bold intentions," unquote. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister over the last 3 years have been in a development coma. Everything developmental has been in a refrigerator. And whilst the Prime Minister had the country in a development coma, he was on a horse as a member of a China horse club flogging a dead horse called DSH. And so, Mr. Speaker, everything was abandoned. The St. Jude's Hospital reconstruction project abandoned. The Hiwanora International redevelopment abandoned. The Boca Group development on the West Coast abandoned. The commissioning of the OKE Hospital abandoned. And calls by patriotic St. Lucians from all walks of life were responded to with insults such as backing dogs, "I don't listen, let the jackasses bray." We petitioned the government to no avail. We march against the government, and the government never shifted its policy, not even a slight degree, to recognize that it was operating in a democracy. Even calls by civil society were treated with disrespect. In fact, they were kicked about with the brutal feet of disrespect and contempt. And they were considered sectoral irritants, Mr. Speaker. But I guess elections are fast approaching. And on Monday evening, I saw the Prime Minister with all his soldiers around him presenting some budget presentation as if that was the very first budget presentation. And the new kid on the block coming in and promising the people of this country that we are going to get you out of the intensive care units. Mr. Speaker, before I get down to business, before I enter the cauldron of this debate, I wish to refer to a few issues advanced by members opposite. The member for Soufre, whilst on his feet in this Honorable House, spoke about the Hummingbird project and say how the Labour Party stopped the project and then it had to take a UWP administration to continue the project. I wish to set the record straight in this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the project was started under the UWP administration. Fact. No approved plan. No approval from Crown Lands. No EIA. The water at the bay is contaminated. In fact, the member should know that people who normally bathe there suffer from eye and air infections. The DCA came and stopped the project. And the DCA stopped the project and asked them at the time, because the Labour Party was going to continue the project, they said you have to have a filtration process so that the water from Forbenier would be clean before it entered the bay. If you're going to test the water, Mr. Speaker, it's not fit for people to bathe just like that. And so this is why the DCA stopped the project. It had nothing to do with the Labour Party stopping any project, Mr. Speaker. The Old Trafford, Mr. Speaker, it started in 2015
Mr. Speaker,
on the PF8.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, the member for Library,
Honorable member for Library.
the member for Library is saying that the DCA stopped a project on the basis of the water quality.
You forget all what I said?
Is DCA?
There was no approval.
Is DCA the entity that determines water quality or construction requirements? Mr. Speaker, the member said that DCA stopped the project because of the level of contamination of the water, and that statement is erroneous and should be withdrawn, or else he has to present the evidence to show that this is why the DCA stopped the project.
May I proceed?
Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, I will repeat that there was no DCA approval. There was no NCA authorization, no Cronglands approval. And I also made the point, Mr. Speaker, that the member for Soufrière is abundantly aware of the fact that the water quality at the bay is not the best. Because people normally suffer from air and eye infection. The member for Kasui South East normally rise on a point of order just to interrupt my presentation. But I want the honorable member for Kasui South East to understand that I'm not easily distracted, and I shall maintain normal navigation and maintain my course. I am speaking about the Old Stratford, which of course the honorable member for Soufrière raised, which started in 2015, BNTF Act under the Labour Party. It was a CDB grant of 1.1 or 1.2 million, if I recall, because I was part of the cabinet. The member for Soufrière was at one of the community meetings. He was present at one of the community meetings because there was consultation to build a drain and a hub so that the market vendors and the minibus drivers could come together. So what was the member for Soufrière talking about, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I am tired of hearing in this honorable house, oh, we have presided over the business of the state for so many years and we did nothing for St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I place on record in this house, without any fear of contradiction, that the Labour Party has done more to advance the development of this country than the United Workers' Party from 1964. And let me just allude to a few examples. I will add on Brits, just a few. For the consumption of, it was in 1964, the NLM merged with the PPP to form the UWP. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, health centers. The Labour Party improved working conditions for our public officers, but you don't care about that. You don't see that as important because we're supposed to be building structures for horses. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Don't spend in laptops, for children because they have laptops at their homes. So you see, the upper class will have no interest in laptop programs. They will see it as a waste. But it is not a waste for those who have been touched by it. Schools. Who built and expanded secondary schools than the Labour Party to ensure that every child enter a secondary school in this country and stop the discrimination, Mr. Speaker. The National Stadium, you forgot it was built by the St. Lucia Labour Party. The Darren Sammy Cricket Ground, who built it? It was the Labour Party. In fact, between 1997 and 2006, we attracted over $1 billion worth of investment in the hotel sector. Many hotels were built during that period, Mr. Speaker. The southern part of the island, tout Fenway, there was in darkness. In many cases, Betafe, Kiteka Lime Place, Bouton had no electricity. And under the leadership of Sir John, he said, it is better to get the people out of Bouton than to bring electricity to the people of Bouton. The Labour Party brought electricity to Bouton, Mr. Speaker. Brought electricity to Bouton. And I have said before on platform and in this house that when the electricity was put at Bouton, the chickens were not even aware that it was night time. They made Juve. Juve, Mr. Speaker. And it was only after they were very sleepy the following day they recognized that they were up all night. And I'm happy that the honorable member for Beaufort South is present in this house. And I welcome him at this juncture because under his leadership as Prime Minister, St. Lucia achieved a tremendous amount of progress. Beaufort, his constituency. My 5 years of secondary school, I was in Beaufort. And before, this would be in Beaufort quite often, I had my aunt living there. I know what Beaufort was like before the honorable member for Beaufort South. You know what used to happen? Cattle all over the place in Beaufort. Pigs all over. You couldn't walk in the Mang, especially when there was a light rain. People couldn't walk there. What they had there, you can call it a square. The roads were in a deplorable condition. The honorable member transformed Beaufort South. Even the Mang now, you don't go to Beaufort and tell people that they're from the Mang. It's Manhattan. It's Manhattan. He elevated that area to the extent that they call it Manhattan. Spell it any way you want. The pronunciation, that's correct. So, Mr. Speaker, Beaufort, Labrie, Choiseul, Micoud South, Micoud North, every constituency was touched by the St. Lucia Labour Party in government. And what did we live in 2006? What did we live in 2006? A growing economy of over 5.4%. Unemployment was down to 13.6%. Indigence had been significantly reduced during that period. You can invent your figures if you want, honorable member. It's okay. The OKEU Hospital, a Labour Party project. The OKEU Hospital, a Labour Party project. The Wellness Center, the Mental Wellness Center. And you see, Mr. Speaker, if I continue along those lines, I will need 40 days and 40 nights to speak about the achievements of the St. Lucia Labour Party administration. Mr. Speaker, I cannot conclude by saying to you that every time the United Workers' Party is in office, they have oppressed my constituency. They have oppressed Beaufort North, oppressed Beaufort South. In 1992, they planted poles. Before the 1992 elections, UWP was in office, planted poles, P1J, Labrie bypass, everywhere, busy planting poles. They did that in Choiseul. They did that all over the place. They won the elections. But you know what they do? What they did then? Instead of bringing the electricity to the people, they gave a contract to uproot every pole. Every pole. And that's why it's shameful for anybody from those respective constituencies to ask people to go on a line and vote for that type of oppression, Mr. Speaker. Oppression. I said 1992, I know what I'm talking about. Mr. Speaker, I heard the member for Canries and Slurry jumping for joy yesterday. Obviously, you know, they believe that they have something good to report. He talked about the economy has grown. And the Prime Minister, to quote him, he said, to put things into context, Mr. Speaker, there are many areas where we tick all the right boxes, both as a government and as a country. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, let us examine those items. The Prime Minister said in his budget speech, the economy continues to grow. It has grown by 8% since we took office. So it's beating its chest. Our debt to GDP ratio is coming down, although it is still a bit above the prudential benchmark. The debt to GDP ratio has fallen from 67.7% in 2015 to 64.9% in 2018. Mr. Speaker, that has nothing to do with the management of the Honorable Prime Minister. In fact, the economic situation would have been much better had he did not interfere with what he found. And I'm not just going to say that, I'm going to consult the Social and Economic Review. On page 6 of the 2016 Economic and Social Review, it says, growth in St. Lucia's economy is estimated to have slowed in 2016, influenced mainly by a contraction in the dominant tourism industry. Real GDP growth fell to 0.9% in 2016, following revised growth of 1.9% in 2015. Activity in the construction sector accounted for approximately 60% of the growth in real GDP in 2016, evidenced mainly by investment in the construction of hotels and commercial properties. In 2016, work on the 435-room Royalton Hotel provided a major flip to the construction sector, as it represented one of the largest private sector construction projects ever undertaken in St. Lucia. This was supported by work on other hotels and commercial buildings during the year. The Royalton Hotel is a project of the St. Lucia Labour Party. So it continued to fuel growth in the construction sector despite the decline in tourism. Mr. Speaker, on page 7 of the 2017 Economic and Social Review, it states, and I quote, preliminary estimates suggest that growth in St. Lucia's economy strengthened in 2017, supported by favorable external economic conditions. A solid expansion in the tourism industry provided much of the impetus for this positive outturn, alongside continued growth in the construction sector. And what was the growth in the construction sector? The Point Seraphine Berth, a Labour Party project. A Labour Party project. The Royalton and Harbour Club. Mr. Speaker, on page 8 of the 2018 Economic and Social Review, says preliminary estimates indicate that real GDP growth slowed to 1.5% in 2018, following revised growth of 3.3% in 2017. Notwithstanding expansion in most other sectors, including tourism, agriculture and manufacturing, a downturn in the construction sector dampened overall GDP growth. On page 18 of that 2018 Economic and Social Review, it said preliminary estimates show that the construction sector contracted by 21.2% in 2018, following real growth of 11.5% in the previous year. So, Mr. Speaker, construction of those major projects by Labour Party has come to an end. They did not start the various roads, including the road from Casseries to Grosile. They got out of the arrangement with the World Bank. In fact, the airport would have started by now. They have delayed the airport reconstruction, and there's no way they're going to finish that airport before elections, which was their central objective. They have delayed it unnecessarily, but we will come to that. So, Mr. Speaker, they continued to beat the chest. Stay-over arrivals, stay-over visitors have increased from 344,000 in 2015 to 394,000 in 2018. Mr. Speaker, on page 8 of the 2018 Economic and Social Review, it said, supported by favorable economic conditions in source markets, the tourism sector remained a dominant source of economic activity, growing by 4.3% in 2018. The Prime Minister himself acknowledged that external factors were responsible for the growth in tourism when he said on page 11 of his budget address, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, In addition to heightened activity in the construction sector, growth will be supported by expansion in the tourism sector, which is expected to continue in 2019, with projected increases in arrivals for stayovers and for cruise visitors. I should point out, the Prime Minister is speaking, that after the recent devastating hurricanes that affected hotel operations in several regional destinations, the situation is now normalizing, and growth is therefore not expected to be quite as robust. This situation, therefore, provides the impetus for us to redouble our marketing and health efforts. So, Mr. Speaker, external factors have shaped the little growth we see there. And the reason why we are critical of this government in terms of that 1.5% growth is that they had no right to interfere with projects that would have continued to fuel growth in the economy and provide employment for the young people of this country. Mr. Speaker, like a broken record, the Prime Minister says that investors continue to want to finance tourism development. But nothing comes out of it. The range, like I said during the debate on the estimate, is out of range. In typical style, the Prime Minister says on page 10 of his budget address, it is also anticipated that in the private sector, at least 7 major hotels are expected to commence during this financial year. And he listed a number of them. A whole Libewa, he gave golf, hotel golf course, whole storybook. That's not the first time we have heard the Prime Minister on that, as, of course, alluded to by my colleagues who spoke before me. And the Prime Minister continues in typical style that these projects will provide hundreds of jobs during the construction phase and further employment once the properties are complete and open. Just like the jobs that were created with DSH. Just like the jobs that were created with DSH. Nothing constructive is happening with DSH. Where are the jobs? Where are the jobs with DSH? You pass there. A cemetery during the night has more activity than there. Mr. Speaker, un cimetière ni plus mouvement passé qu'au DSH here. Because nous n'y a un cimetière là-bas, on a toujours passé boy. Moi toujours à passer boy. Moi toujours à passer boy. Vous comprenez? And then the Prime Minister is there flogging a dead horse. Then he said there's primary surplus. The Honorable Member for Ancillary Canneries was quite happy about primary surplus, and he said that with such, conviction and glee. Yeah, I'm happy for him. But here is the reality, Mr. Speaker. On page 8 of the Prime Minister's address, he acknowledges that this was a byproduct of circumstance and not a calculated goal of his. And I quote the Prime Minister's own words. On the fiscal side, there was an improved performance driven by higher revenue of 6.4%. Receipt from the CIP was significantly higher at 66.4 million compared to 27.8 million the year before. I want to pause in the middle of that quotation. They want to crucify the member for Kaswi South. I have, and the member for Kaswi South knows that I have my own views on CIP. But if it wasn't for the little CIP he fought for, what would have happened to us? What would have happened to us? You see what CIP did for you? So tell me, where is the brilliant management of the Prime Minister? Where is the brilliant management of members opposite? Where is it? And listen to what happened because the CIP funds generated so much. This led to a larger primary surplus, up from 52.3 million to 101.5 million, and a lower overall fiscal deficit down to 69.7 million from 110.1 million the year before. Our public debt to GDP declined to 64.9% in 2018 from 65.2% in 2017. So you see, it was no magic. I'm happy you came upstairs. There was no magic by the Prime Minister. Whilst those opposite, everything the Prime Minister says, they then knocking. Knocking. You all have no choice. Because you all have no independence of thought. You all just have to fall in line. The contents take the shape of the container.
You fire people.
So those circumstances has caused the Prime Minister to declare in joyous words that he is fiscally prudent with the country's resources and that the fiscal deficit is within manageable limits, and speaking of primary surplus. Mr. Speaker, clearly from the foregoing is that our problem has been rapid expenditure growth and sluggish revenues. It's not that all the problems we are having, it's not that revenues do not grow, but expenditure has been rising much faster than revenues. Given that the uptick in revenue is from volatile sources.
Honorable members, I still need to hear the honorable member from Library. You may proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies, you all are too loud. Ladies must be seen and not
Honorable
heard.
member.
My humble apology. Mr. Speaker, given that the uptick in revenue is from volatile sources, combined with high debt stock and debt to GDP ratio, and a lack of investor confidence in this current government, the Prime Minister could not have borrowed in the manner he wanted to. This incidentally led to a lower capital spending, which, coupled with the increase in revenues, inadvertently led to a narrowing of the fiscal deficit and a primary surplus. Mr. Speaker, even though we were making primary, surpluses over the years, that doesn't mean you are managing the economy as you should. The alternative to restructuring, according to the World Bank, for example, and in its publications it would state that, is high primary surpluses. Jamaica, according to the World Bank, has adopted this approach, achieving primary surpluses that average roughly 9% of GDP. Nonetheless, Jamaica's public sector debt has increased over the last few years because of takeovers of contingent liabilities, spending related to natural disasters, and slippages before elections. Of course, high primary surpluses extract a major cost in terms of foregone government expenditure in social and physical infrastructure, which puts a premium on efficiency of expenditure that does actually occur. And it proceeded to indicate that one way to increase fiscal surpluses could be to improve tax revenues. Already it says attempts to increase primary surpluses by tax rate increases could be counterproductive in the Caribbean, since tax revenues already represent a significant fraction of GDP in most countries, and higher tax rates deter growth. And it continued that the most fruitful approach to increasing primary surpluses is lower and better government spending, along with greater reliance on the private sector to substitute for providing services now provided by the government. So you see, Mr. Speaker, a typical example is that they should have allowed the World Bank to finance the airport redevelopment. That is a typical example. Allow the World Bank to deal with the redevelopment and focus on investing in the productive capacities of the economy. So you give yourself space to borrow for the true and real development of the country. And so at this juncture, I want to again allude to the Prime Minister's comments in his budget presentation. He said, and I quote, "Government's major infrastructure investments in this fiscal year include the following. The HIA redevelopment project has started with designs and related geotechnical surveys at an advanced stage. The project is expected to take 30 months from groundbreaking to completion and is expected to cost US 175 million. My question to the Prime Minister is this. The Prime Minister has indicated that they're not going to demolish the existing terminal building. I'm not going to fight with the Prime Minister on that particular issue. But my question is, there was a master plan to locate the terminal in a particular location. I want you to indicate, through you, Mr. Speaker, I heard you are putting, and that's what you said. You are not going to put the terminal building in the location that was proposed by the Labour Party.
You didn't propose it. We proposed it first.
Fine, but you're not going there anymore. Right, beautiful. Now, if you're not going there anymore, and you are not going to demolish the existing building, the ramp space is in front of that building. You need to have more than one taxiway leading to a ramp. So you need a new ramp area to service the new terminal. So how are you going to accomplish that? By taking the terminal and building it away from its proposed location. Currently, you spoke the last time about, through you, Mr. Speaker, through you. Everything is through you, Mr. Speaker. The last time, the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, indicated that he's going to build a parallel taxiway, which I fully support. But currently, we do not have enough space within the airport compound to put a parallel taxiway. So the Prime Minister would have to do what Acres International, in their proposal in 1987, proposed to the government to purchase lands around the airport. But he has actually encroached on it with that road for DSH, for Tiwaking. He has encroached on the lands that were supposed to have been protected. He is now compromising the disused runway, which is what we call the Kakabef. You have to acquire more land. So you're going closer to the river to build a parallel taxiway. Are you aware of that, Mr. Prime Minister? Let me make something clear to the Prime Minister via you, Mr. Speaker. Let me make something clear to the Prime Minister. US $175 million is not $5. And we will not be in this house and allow the Prime Minister to believe that he can borrow $175 million US for Papi Show. It must be done properly. And the government of Taiwan, the government of Taiwan would appreciate the position of the opposition. That if things are not done properly, you come with a proper plan. You must ensure that everything is in order. Where you're going to build that ramp, how that ramp will actually interact with the existing runway.
A point of order.
Yes, let me hear you.
Again, the member from Labrie is impugning that the Prime Minister is the one who's making these decisions. A company called Harry, who is the same company who did the architectural and participated in the original master plan, are the same.
Mr. Speaker, there is no point of order here.
It is a point of order. It's a point of
order.
Because he's impugned my name and suggested that the Prime Minister is the one who's making all these decisions. And that is far from the truth. And in fact, is that he's again trying to mislead the House in terms of what's taken place. And he knows exactly where the original terminal was supposed to go, which was behind the existing terminal, and it would have to be broken down. And we have said that it's not worth to do that because there's too much congestion at the airport, and it's now being done on the adjacent to the terminal. But what I want him to do is to withdraw the statement, because they are professional people who have put together a master plan. And he is suggesting that, again, that we cannot have a parallel taxi rate, where in fact there are suggestions on how to make the parallel taxi rate. And so therefore these are not decisions being made by myself.
Mr. Member for Library.
That's just an interruption in my presentation.
Then you give way. So listen now. No, but this is a serious thing. Here's what I'm saying. It's the way that you phrase it in your statements.
I said I want the Prime Minister to tell me.
Good.
So,
and everything you're directing at is the Prime Minister that is deciding. And Well, it's not the issue of going through me, the issue of your statements, that you keep giving the impression that all decisions are made by the Prime Minister. Yeah. But I'm just bringing to your attention the issue here. All right?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But on the whole issue of St. Jude's, the former Prime Minister, he wasn't the architect for St. Jude's. He wasn't the architect for St. Jude's. He wasn't on the board of St. Jude's. He wasn't working for Al Crow. But he is the one getting the blows in this very chamber for St. Jude's reconstruction. Huh? Yes, Slasper.
You can't take.
Honorable members. Honorable members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am quite conversant with the standing orders. And at no time, the member for Library will try to disrespect you in this chamber. You in control of this chamber. But I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, I take great care when I speak. And I will ask the Prime Minister again, because this is not a trivial investment. This is not a trivial investment. And if things are not done properly, when the honorable member for Cassis East becomes Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, we will revisit those arrangements if it's not done properly. So I am hoping that the Taiwanese authorities are listening, and they would ensure that the government has everything in order before they proceed with any engagement regarding airport redevelopment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister continued, the Taiwanese funded road development program amounting to US $42 million over 36 months is about to commence on strategic roads island-wide, including roads that will link farmers and rural communities with the rest of the island. Mr. Prime Minister, I realize this time around you have actually left out the specific roads that you alluded to. Was there a strategic retreat from that? Through you, Mr. Speaker, because I remember the road from the Black Bay Junction to St. Jude's was one of the roads listed. So I'm hoping that it is still one of the roads listed to be done under that US $42 million. Because I know they started with a very ambitious list of roads in the south. But you see, they have been retreating from that first list because they are getting closer and closer to elections, and so they're going to see how they can engage in the preservation of personal political power as opposed to doing what is necessary. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that apart from those roads on that US $42 million, that at least certain other roads could be done in my constituency, including Alan Louis Street. Sir Alan Louis Street in Labrie on the recon and rehab was supposed to have been done after Lakwa and the Banks-Laguas Road was paved. High Street Labrie. Those roads are in a deplorable condition. And I'm hoping for some level of relief, given the fact that my minibus drivers and all of us in Labrie with vehicles, we pay $1.50 more on a fuel, on a gallon of fuel to ensure that our roads are kept properly. The Debwa Road is in a deplorable condition as we speak, and I'm hoping for some relief. Because, Mr. Speaker, again, it is because of interference on the part of that government that the infrastructure is the way it is, without imposing an additional 150. These were the roads that contracts were already signed for. The minor road of Debwa in Auger, the Agis Road of Wavinpon, Catin, the Mac Drive up Upper Auger, the Lona Amigo Road, Kelly Edward Drive in Pom, Plumbers Road at Pom, Musson Road at Black Bay, Labrie Plainfield Road, Rudy John Beach Park Road, the Olibo Zoo Road, Francis Avenue at Béranger, René Drive at Béranger, Chef Francis Parkway at Béranger. In 2016, having had the Banslaho Road nearing completion, formalities were already in train for the rehabilitation of the Majomel and Catin roads, the Mont Leblanc Road, Mont Paul, Laguas, Laho Ring Road, as well as the Debwa Road. And today, the Debwa Road is in a deplorable condition. And when I'm speaking about the schedule of roads, if through normal budgeting conditions, from the Ministry of Infrastructure and the CDP program. In addition, a clear commitment was secured from a South American country to finance the construction and rehabilitation of the Black Bay Palm St. Jude Road and the road from Joy Juice to the hospital. Those two roads, we had already secured a commitment. And one of the roads, the Prime Minister has indicated he will do it. And I'm hoping he delivers on it. As we speak, that Black Bay Palm St. Jude's Road, when the hospital, the St. Jude's Hospital was in operation, that's where vehicles, emergency vehicles, used to pass. And there are no sidewalks at OJ. And so they have actually erected a number of speed humps because people are really driving fast on that road. Not emergency vehicles now, but just people. And so that road we are talking about had a component for sidewalk to be built so that the elderly and the school children who walk from Upper OJ and from Lower OJ to the OJ Combined School will be able to walk to school safely without risking their lives, Mr. Speaker. 2016 would have seen the commencement of the construction of the Library Market. It was in the budget. When you came in, fully funded by the Taiwanese administration, they didn't do the market, Mr. Speaker. And when they had their new budget in 2017, gone. Up to now. In 2017-2018, in keeping with the just normal budgets of the government, the construction of the Dale Joye Road at Herald Estate, construction of the Nafan Road at Herald Estate, construction of the Bayer Road by the Chicos, construction of the Valier Road at Bans, construction of the Mike Leons and Dudu Roads at Upper Bans, construction of the multipurpose facility at Laho, construction of Labrie Beachfront Market Road, completion of the Citrus Grove Road, because the upper part has been done, the lower part has been done. It's just a central piece that needed to be done at Citrus Grove. And the Tito Road. Construction of the Laguas Laundry Dixon Road. In 2018-2019, completion of roadworks at Black Bay Palm Upper OJ. Upgrade fencing and lighting of the OJ playing field. Upgrade fencing and lighting of Desmond Colimo Park. Reconstruction of the Monrepo Hill and Lama Road, construction of Moncabwit Roads, construction of the Anus Road, and construction of the Vernel Road. That was for that period based on manageable amounts, Mr. Speaker. 2019-2020, rehabilitation of OJ Combined, Bans Laguas, and Labrie Boys School, construction of the Youth Center at Desmond Colimo Park, and construction of the Olibo Youth Facility. In 2020-21, in addition, road rehabilitation projects were definitely going to be concluded in the areas that Proud has now entered to be able to rationalize those lands for the people. And sometimes they want to price the land to bear in mind the cost of the infrastructure. So I was assisting with that process, Mr. Speaker. To continue with the Prime Minister's own words, in addition, road rehabilitation projects are in train for the West Coast Road and the Millennium Highway, where the consultant has been appointed and designs are well advanced. Both of these roads are funded by the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund, grants amounting to approximately US 43 million. Again, Mr. Speaker, I believe that when we were in office, we were well advanced in our preparation to commence those roads. And I don't have to go and build a long argument to convince you that those roads would have been done fueling construction activity in this country. And it says site preparation has started in anticipation of the construction of the new wing at the St. Jude's Hospital, as well as rehabilitation and improvement to the existing structures. The estimated cost of works is US $30 million. We will come to St. Jude's momentarily, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on page 29 of the Prime Minister's budget address, he promises that within the coming financial year, we will be focusing on the following three areas: the rehabilitation of the Millennium Highway and West Coast Road, reconstruction or rehabilitation of secondary roads and collector roads, redevelopment and expansion of Iwanora International Airport to handle 1 million passengers by 2022. Mr. Speaker, the last time in this Honorable House, I made it clear to the Prime Minister that based on the uncertainty in developing and operating airports, it is better, well established by the World Bank, well established in air transport economics and finance, that it's much better to allow the World Bank to do it. I even quoted professionals in the field like Norman Ashford and Clifford A. Moore, who said that the pressure to move airports out of the public sector is widespread throughout the world. So it was not an experiment that the Labour Party was undertaking when we decided to go with the World Bank. And it also said, in terms of volume, the World Bank Group is the largest agency in the world providing financial and technical assistance to developing countries. Mr. Speaker, I went further to quote a source from the World Bank that says that private operation of airports has disclosed substantial efficiency gains, better and longer use of existing assets. Often, however, the sector has performance and fiscal risks that need to be carefully managed by governments. And then I quoted Rigas Doganis, an expert in airports, who said that when you undertake an expansion of an airport, you increase the unit cost. And if the airport was profitable, it would now become either marginally profitable or begin to make losses. And that's understandable, because when you build an airport for the next 20 years, you will have to build greater capacity to be able to accommodate the next 20 years. So you'll have additional capacity. But this is what Rigas Doganis said. Smaller airports that hold back on investment, even though they are heavily congested at peak periods, may actually achieve profitability despite the smaller traffic throughput and higher unit costs. The implications are clear. Airports should hold back investment as long as possible if they want to keep the unit cost of production low. In addition, they should avoid grandiose developments which entail very large jumps, unquote. What I am saying, Mr. Speaker, I am saying do not hold back on the airport redevelopment. But do not incur the fiscal risk. Let the World Bank do it. I am saying allow the World Bank to do it, and do it now. And allow SLASPA to deal with the security issues, air traffic control and security at your airports.
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes in which to conclude.
The interruptions took 10 minutes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the subject of St. Jude's has been a hotly debated topic, according to the Prime Minister in this Honourable House. And the Prime Minister has indicated in his budget presentation that he's going to build a new a 90-bed facility that will cater for a number of things, a new wing to incorporate all the functions and services, integration through retrofitting of some existing buildings, and revision of the internal layout of buildings to be integrated for functional efficacy and compliance to minimum standards. He said that the project is expected to last for 18 months. Funding for the project will come from the US 10 million, which they founded, which they could have completed the existing structure within 6 months and transfer the patients and staff to St. Jude's. And then they're taking another $20 million in loan to do some chicken coop to put people in. They are busy desecrating areas with sewer systems that connect with a number of different areas in the south. Mr. Speaker, the decision to go and build a new wing would necessitate site preparation. So they will always say to you that they had to do that to put the new wing, incurring millions of dollars in the process to do just that. And the opposition is saying to the government that not even the technical audit said to them that they could not have completed the St. Jude's Hospital. I all kind of Thank you. So you see, Mr. Speaker, for the last 10 minutes, so very well. So, Mr. Speaker, to construct a new facility would necessarily entail an outlay of millions of dollars. That was not necessary, Mr. Speaker. They tried to say the flow wasn't good. Who was involved in planning it? The Ministry of Health. The board at St. Jude's with doctors and others actively involved in determining flow, determining everything, Mr. Speaker. But the government has decided to go on a new wing, ignoring all the contributions of foreign governments towards that particular facility. So, Mr. Speaker, when St. Lucia has a government such as this, United Workers' Party, that destroys millions of dollars in assistance from sympathetic countries that are trying to assist us in charting the true and real development of our country, we are destroying our country's reputation. Further, it does not create an improved framework for us to attract foreign assistance when the Prime Minister makes shamefully irresponsible statements in the international community to the effect that they're focusing too much on fighting corruption. And if I'm wrong, the Prime Minister can correct me. A source quoted him as saying, at the last OAS summit, and I quote, and the Prime Minister is free to emerge on a point of order, if that's not true. Where they said transparency, he said transparency should not be onerous, that it takes precedence over development, unquote.
So, Mr. Speaker, he invited me. I never made such statement. I have not been to any OAS summit meetings.
Yeah.
Are you going to withdraw, Honorable Member?
It's actually in the public domain.
Then can you put it?
You didn't say that?
Honorable Member, you simply said you're going to quote a source.
Yes.
But you didn't give the source.
I said at the...
A statement, are you quoting a source where he attended a summit, but you never said...
I said the OAS summit.
You said...
Yes.
You're quoting a source that he said at the OAS summit. The source. Yeah. You've not said what the source is.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but the most important thing is whether he made the statement or not. I told him that
then
I'm subject to
he's saying that he never made the statement. So if you're going to continue, can you withdraw this matter if you're not going to provide?
We can find the exact... Okay. So truth must be withdrawn.
No. That's not what I'm saying.
Yes. You know, Mr. Speaker, he made the statement.
You said that if he, on a point of order, you invited him, and if he said that he
didn't say it,
then you have to take a certain course of action.
It's in the public domain.
But you've not said where.
Yes, but he made it at a meeting. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, anyway, I will furnish the source momentarily. So, Mr. Speaker, the point is, this statement is extravagantly dangerous as the research clearly establishes that the best way for donors to make the link between aid and spending clear is to make aid more transparent. A specific option for donors is to provide aid as general budget support. Such aid goes directly through the budget and is linked to expenditure allocation and public sector management reforms. We are jeopardizing our chances of mobilizing the international community for support to assist our development. Already, Mr. Speaker, theoretical literature suggests donors would be unwilling to offer general budget support because it gives donors no influence over how the aid is used unless they can effectively apply conditionality to the general budget support. Budget support is not a cure, but does support spending in the fiscal framework and is most effective where the donor and recipient agree on the main policy and expenditure priorities. So when we decide we are not going to sign on to this or we're not going to do this, then That could be misconstrued, Mr. Speaker. And this is it. We have always said we must exercise an abundance of caution. Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw your attention at this juncture to a publication or report by the International Monetary Fund, and it was in the Jamaica Observer of Sunday, April 14, 2019, where it stated that a new report published by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has estimated that government corruption has robbed the world of US $1 trillion in tax revenues, or 1.25% of global GDP. More specifically, Mr. Speaker, it states that the report entitled Fiscal Monitor, Curbing Corruption revealed that the least corrupt governments collected 4% of GDP more in tax revenues than their peers, with the highest levels of corruption based on analysis of countries at similar income levels. The report continued, lower corruption would increase economic growth, further boosting revenues. The IMF added that less corrupt countries dedicate a higher share of resources to social spending, including education and health, while more corrupt countries are forced to overpay for building roads and hospitals, as well as impacts.
Member Library, Prime Minister is standing on a point.
On a point of order again, Mr. Speaker. Again, if we're going to conduct the affairs of this House, let's do it fairly. The member invited me to indicate whether, in fact, I made a statement. I indicated to him that I did not make such a statement. Instead of withdrawing the statement, Mr. Speaker, he's indicated at some other point he's going to come back and address it. I've taken the time to find out the summit I attended was the Summit of Americas, not the OAS. And let me, if I may, Mr. Speaker, read my statement, because it's important. The 8th Summit of the Americas in Lima, Peru, April 13th to the 14th, raised issues related to democratic governance against corruption. St. Lucia's Prime Minister, Honorable Alan Shastry, in his statement at the summit, noted that leadership is called on to practice responsible and good governance by denying corruption a foothold. The Prime Minister stressed that the responsibility for social advancement of the people of the hemisphere through sustainable economic growth is a daunting task that demands transparency and accountability of processes and institutions. Speaking specifically to St. Lucia, the Prime Minister focused on steps the government has already taken to improve good governance. He noted that the administration had required the ministers, permanent secretaries, and board members of statutory agents to take and pass governance courses. He also spoke to the amendments in the Crown Proceedings Act to enable the recovery of public funds with no statute of limitations. St. Lucia has also recently signed the OAS mechanism for follow-up on the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. A constant advocate for small island developing states, Prime Minister explained that despite best efforts, citizens are at times being unfairly singled out by countries and institutions that try to impose upon them rules and regulations that were themselves derived from a non-transparent process. The Prime Minister pledged St. Lucia's commitment to openness and implored the international community to recognize that transparency should not be onerous and it takes precedence over development. So when it's put in its proper context, and it's not what I quoted, right? Impractical and subjective mechanisms are unsustainable. He noted that while calling for a collective effort, a better integration of systems, and sharing data and knowledge, we must value our democracies, which are inherently based on one citizen, one vote, thereby entitling each and every person the expectation that government will manage the public good and provide essential services to secure the present and future. Sir, Mr. Speaker, my administration takes corruption very seriously. And in fact, I am proud of the fact that when we came into office, the first thing that we did was to amend it. And I would like the member from Labrie to withdraw his statement. And if he's going to quote things, come prepared to quote them properly.
Mr. Member for Library, the statement earlier whereby I'd ask you for the source.
I did promise to give you the source.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just, Honorable Prime Minister, if you will take up that issue, I'm expecting that you will deal with it further if you're in your rebuttal. At this present time, like I said to the member for library, I wanted him to provide a source and he could not provide a source, and I moved him away at the time from that particular point. Because he simply said a source. He got it from a source where you attended a summit without saying what source it was. And I moved him away from that particular point. So I'm hoping now that you will take up the point further in your rebuttal, so that you may want to expound on the position on your government or yourself with reference to that particular point. No, but I stopped him I prevented him from going further with that particular point. You understand? So can you, member for library, can you please continue?
Mr. Speaker.
I'm not going back over that point, sir.
Yeah, but the Miami Herald is asking for me to withdraw. And
member for library, I'm not going back over that point.
Right, so what is
So move on.
Very good. So, Mr. Speaker, continuing, the IMF added that less corrupt countries dedicated a higher share of resources to social spending, including education and health, while more corrupt countries are forced to overpay for building roads and hospitals. Unquote. Mr. Speaker, I am more or less from the opposition side asking the government that when it makes statements and when the opposition speak about procurement procedures, let us make the effort to ensure that we are as transparent as possible in doing those things. Because sometimes we become wavet devant poule. Because you have developed countries, they could simply make a determination on the basis of what they see. And that could affect our business in St. Lucia. That's all I'm saying to the Prime Minister. When he makes statements like that, and obviously they are quoted in many sections, but I'm not going there. The Prime Minister went through his entire budget presentation without even alluding to good government, which underpins any democracy that will function effectively and in a transparent fashion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how many more minutes do I have, Mr. Speaker? I was interrupted for about 30 minutes, cumulatively.
25 to, sir.
25 minutes.
25 to 5, you end there.
I was disturbed for a long time, and yes, Mr. Speaker, I definitely need more time.
What's it?
10 minutes, man. 15.
Speaker, I'd like to invoke standing order 10. Allow the member for library a further 15 minutes to complete his presentation.
Honourable members, the question is that standing order 4210 be invoked and an additional 15 minutes be granted to the member for library in which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, honorable members. Thank you, Prime Minister. I heard you saying aye very loudly, and I appreciate that. Yeah, he said aye very nicely. Mr. Speaker, During the course of the debate, the member for Choiseul was on fire. Took the opposition to task regarding Lucy Lake. I'm not in the extra time yet. I had until 25 to, and I have 15 minutes. So I'm still within my hour. Very well. He's practicing prudential economics. He's prudent, that's why he didn't use the 45 minutes. But you see, Mr. Speaker, in the members' haste to attack the opposition, to impress his Prime Minister, you talk about Lucy Lake, we put policy in place. Obviously, he was implying that the Labour Party.
Honourable member for Library, he did not say that.
I said implied. That was my exact words. He implied. Anyway, I am proceeding, Mr. Speaker, with your permission. The member for Choiseul, I'm on course. The member for Choiseul said about Lucy Lake, and people are saying when they need street lamps, they must go through their parliamentary representative. I listened to him attentively, I even wrote it down. I must say to this Honourable House that we have never put any such policy in place. The only times that parliamentarians get involved in the allocation of lights is if you are written to or called, they say you have 15 lamps based on representation you would make on behalf of your constituents. I don't know when last lamps were allocated to me as a parliamentarian. And so, when people go to Lucy Lake say to them, you go and see your parliamentary representative. And when they come to me, I say no. There is no such mechanism in place. So the Labour Party never put that mechanism in place that lights must go through some parliamentary representative. I believe that you are a victim of misleading information. That's how I would put it. And that's why you were so careful in crafting your
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, please. Just for clarification, I did indicate, Mr. Speaker, very clearly, I have no idea who instituted the policy, and I also said very clearly, I do not care. I was speaking of the principle based, and I also mentioned the member for Viewfort South raised it as a concern, Mr. Speaker. So we may be on the same page, but I don't think you should, seek political mileage on. We are neighbors, don't jump the fence.
Actually, member, I wasn't trying to put pressure on you. I was just making it very clear to this House that we did not put that mechanism in place. And so Lucy Lake must stop telling people that they must go through their parliamentary representative, because there's a community program where they can put the lamps for the people in their respective constituencies. Now, regarding the sites, you have some beautiful sites in Choiseul. And instead of suggesting others to undertake that development in terms of the sites, I think one of the things that the young people in Choiseul are already speaking about is to organize a Choiseul Development Foundation. And so they could acquire some very important sites in Choiseul, so they could have some serious tourism sites. When we had the CIP monies, it was, of course, that's a neighboring constituency, and like I said in the debate on the estimate, part of Choiseul politically, geographically, is in Labrie. And wherever there is one Laborian life, my troops will always be there to protect them. And so I will speak appropriately on issues, because when the Labour Party put in place the CIP program, part of it was to develop tourism in Choiseul, because emerging market niches can help deepen impact of tourism on the local economy. And we intended to assist Choiseul in developing its sites, to provide employment and to attract tourists into that area, consistent with recommendations of the World Bank. Mr. Speaker, I now come to a very important juncture. Yesterday, or last evening, the member for Castries Central, and it's just a pity that the member for Castries Central is not present in this honorable house, where when I said in the motion, the no confidence motion debate, that the Prime Minister joined his Lima group without the approval of Cabinet, and you asked me to withdraw on the basis that she felt she belongs to the Cabinet and would have knowledge of what happened in Cabinet, and so I was in no position, because I'm a parliamentarian and not a member of Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, when I spoke at the debate on the estimates, I asked her to furnish this honorable house with the Cabinet conclusion that gave the Prime Minister such authority to join such a group, which is contrary to our arrangements in CARICOM. In CARICOM, we coordinate trade and foreign policy. We have treaty obligations. And this is a very serious matter. And she went on and on in terms of talking about how the Prime Minister is visionary and how the Prime Minister is doing the right thing and standing on the point of principle. Mr. Speaker, as we continue our assault on this Batem Popot budget, a disappointing, error-laden and financially reckless budget, I need to address the issue of truth, fact, principle and solidarity. Mr. Speaker, some people in this house are very uncomfortable with the truth. Some are strangers to the truth, and some are zealous defenders of the strangers to the truth. Mr. Speaker, since I made the irrefutable statement at the no confidence motion debate, that Prime Minister joined the Lima group without the knowledge and authority of Cabinet and the people of St. Lucia. The member for Castries Central and minister in the Ministry of External Affairs has tried to take me on to defend the Prime Minister. At the no confidence motion debate, her response was to ask me to withdraw the statement because I was in no position to know this, not because it was untrue. Although parliamentary practice was on my side and requires a minister disputing a statement to provide the refuting evidence, I withdrew the statement so that I could proceed with my presentation, Mr. Speaker. However, during the debate on the appropriation bill, I again made the statement and challenged the minister to produce a cabinet conclusion authorizing the Prime Minister to join the Lima group prior to his renegade, retrograde and reckless decision, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, instead of letting sleeping dogs lie and allowing the Prime Minister to attempt to extricate himself from this tangled foreign policy mess, the minister stood in this house yesterday to defend the indefensible. And what defense has she offered? That the Prime Minister demonstrated vision, that there is a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, and St. Lucia stood on principle, and no cabinet decision is required for St. Lucia to join the Lima group. Really, Madam Minister? Permit me therefore, Mr. Speaker, to expose the supreme ignorance of the minister in that regard. The facts are that according to the Carter Center of former US President Jimmy Carter, Venezuela has one of the most democratic electoral systems in the world. 2, that in the May 20th, 2018 Venezuelan presidential elections, Nicolas Maduro polled 6,245,862 votes, or 67.8% of the votes cast, while opposition candidate Henry Falcon polled 1.9 million. 1,927,387 votes, or 20.9%. And a second opposition candidate, Xavier, polled 996,181 votes, or 10.8% of the votes. That foreign interest advised the opposition to disrupt and boycott the 2018 presidential elections, and 2 prospective opposition candidates who were involved with several foreign-backed efforts to violently overthrow the legitimate government of Venezuela resulting in the loss of over 200 innocent Venezuelan lives, were disqualified from contesting the presidency. That during the election campaign, opposition elements aligned to certain foreign interests engaged in violent and terror attacks, including the burning alive of Black Maduro supporters. The burning alive of Black Maduro supporters. That the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela has been created by the illegal imposition of sanctions on the country by foreign countries, thus preventing the government from buying food, medicines, and other supplies and services for the Venezuelan people. That the illegal attempt to impose a parallel government in Venezuela and overt attempts to try to get the army, bribe them, is further destabilizing the country and prolonging needlessly the pain and suffering of the Venezuelan people. That Juan Guaido never contested a presidential election in Venezuela and has no constitutional authority or legitimacy whatsoever. A man who never contested an election for president declares himself president. He's not even a president I was, Mr. Speaker. He's not even a president I was. And how can you embrace this gentleman as president of Venezuela? It's just like we just say the speaker or the president of the Senate should be the prime minister of St. Lucia. And then the opposition just recognize the speaker or the president of the Senate as prime minister of the country because we do not agree with the direction the country is taking. No! The member for Miku South is the prime minister of St. Lucia, in keeping with our constitution, in keeping with our democracy. To declare himself or to be declared by others president. Section 233 of the Venezuelan constitution only allows the president of the National Assembly to take charge of the presidency for an interim period of 30 days to schedule an election, plus the time to inaugurate the new president elected. If an elected president becomes permanently unavailable to serve prior to his inauguration, this is clearly not the case in Venezuela. And so neither Juan Guaido nor any of the persons he has purported to appoint have any authority under the Venezuelan constitution. No authority whatsoever. But we want to recognize an individual who's not even a president I was as the legitimate president of Venezuela when a president was elected. Where's the principle involved in that? Mr. Speaker, these are the facts which CARICOM as a respected regional grouping and other principal countries considered when they call for adherence to the United Nations principles of non-interference and non-intervention and the pursuit of dialogue and peaceful solutions. And our Prime Minister representing us at CARICOM was part of that decision and decision in defense of Venezuelan sovereignty, just as the 12 apostles sat with Jesus on the very night before he was crucified. And all swore they would not betray him. But what happened? As we are in the season where we commemorate the resurrection of the Prince of Peace, it's very interesting that clearly the posture assumed by our Prime Minister is tantamount to betrayal. So tell me, where is the vision? Where is the principle? So when Judas betrayed Christ, that was principle. So how in heaven's name can anyone say that the renegade decision by the Prime Minister to join the Lima Group is anything but a betrayal of our friend Venezuela? A betrayal of our fellow CARICOM brothers and sisters, and an even bigger betrayal of the people of St. Lucia who do not support this blatant bullying of the government and people of Venezuela to subvert their democratic will and steal their state assets, including their oil resources and revenues. And why has our Prime Minister so embarrassed and belittled us with such a blatant betrayal of international principle, regional solidarity, and national pride? Mr. Speaker, From day one, I've been trying to caution the Prime Minister against those types of maneuverings. Look at when he went to the meeting. President Trump did not even know our Prime Minister's name and call him to speak, you, not even Mr. Prime Minister or Mr. Shasney, before going to the meeting with President Trump. The Prime Minister could have consulted the member for Beaufort South, who as Prime Minister met with US Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama. You should have sought the advice and guidance of the member for Beaufort South. He knows how to maneuver. He maneuvers in the international community with great dexterity. Mr. Speaker, our Prime Minister, after all efforts at currying favor by falsely praising the President for his leadership, seriously, Mr. PM, could not even get a word in about removing sanctions on our police force or getting visa-free access to the US as he promised to the people of St. Lucia during the last election campaign. So my humble advice to the Prime Minister and Minister and Prime Minister is to recognize the error and folly in their decision and get St. Lucia out of this Lima group. We cannot afford the ridicule and reprisals of such foreign policy recklessness. So please spare St. Lucians a negative fallout from such a dangerous and ill-conceived association. Mr. Speaker, the people of Palestine and the minister spoke there last night about humanitarian crisis, and we must be sensitive to the plight of our brothers and sisters. The same UN resolution that spoke to the establishment of the Israeli state spoke about the establishment of a Palestinian state. And up to this point in time,
Honorable Member, you have 5 minutes in which to complete.
up to this time, Mr. Speaker, the Palestinian people are suffering. Places in Africa. And where is the sympathy from this government? Where is the sympathy and empathy for the people of Venezuela, for the people of Palestine, for the people of Sudan? Where is the empathy and where is the sympathy? So, Mr. Speaker, from pages 30 to 42, the Prime Minister said it was his policy agenda, his vision, so to speak. Mr. Speaker, those pages are pregnant with innuendos and approaches like Masilili. On page 4, it spoke about, first of all, during the election campaign, it was 5 to stay alive. Now he has some 6 key areas to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth by 2022. It's just a whole libewa, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even on the policy side, the Prime Minister has failed to provide broad policy recommendations, far less specific policy recommendations to achieve economic and social development, and to instigate concrete responses within the decision-making bodies of government. In other words, this government has no rational and convincing proposal for the economic, social, environmental, and cultural advancement of St. Lucia. This is why St. Lucians cannot wait to exhale, to get members opposite who have been abusing us since that debate, calling us incompetent, calling us all types of names. They are the incompetent ones. And the people of St. Lucia will soon decide. They will come in at their own time. And so, on Monday night, the Prime Minister was pleading tearfully for restored confidence in his failed and failing policies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.